All right. All right. So formal welcome to you, General Menon. It's a really big honor and big pleasure to have you on this chat. Thanks for accepting this invitation. And I've been your student, and here I am back with a question for you to learn a little bit more lessons. And I have with me some of my friends from the corporate world. Right. So let me set a stage of the topic, and then I'm sure everybody is eager to hear you more than me. So the backdrop is the pandemic, right? And we in the corporate world are so used to planning, from the historical data, and we take everything from the past, and our brilliance lies in predicting it in the future, even including we are building the algorithms the same way, right? Gentlemen, are you still able to hear me, or is there a? Oops, I think we lost him.
Sorry, Rishi, I lost you because I think something went wrong with my computer.
No problem. No problem. I'll just. No problem. I understand. So I'll just repeat a bit. I just want to set up a context of the chat today. It's the backdrop is the pandemic, right? And we in the corporate world, I was saying that we take everything from the past and extrapolate in the future, and and we build all scenarios around it, all the things that we have seen. And the best of the plans in the corporate world would probably take at say up to 99% of probabilities of all the outliers, and we that's where our expertise lies. But that 1% that we may have missed out causes havoc at times, and then this year has seen that. And I was just listening to Kishore Bayani, who sold his entire retail setup to Reliance, and he was saying that in the worst of his scenarios, he did not imagine his cash flows calculations where his stores would be closed for 3 or 4 months, and that event actually made it unsustainable for him to keep the business, resulting in the sale, right? And that's how bad it could be. And I remember that our Prime Minister, while announcing the lockdown back in March, did mention that there would be economic consequences of this lockdown, and he then used the phrase that "Jaan hai to jahan hai," and which is probably what was playing in Kishore Bayani's mind when he, probably with a heavy heart, sold his business. But now, keeping that analogy to the operations run by armed forces and the scenario analysis done by in those operations, we now you really can't hide behind that saying, "Jaan hai to jahan hai," because that is exactly what is at stake. And that 1% needs to be factored in, and that's what I heard Simon Sinek saying as well, that in armed forces even that 1% is factored, and that is probably the big difference between how between the two organizations, or between the armed forces and the corporate world, even though the objective of the planning is different, in the two, but the preparedness and the operational resilience is very, very different. So with that backdrop, we would like to understand from you how armed forces, and especially army that you have had a distinguished career in, really trains its officers, trains itself in this aspect, which is extremely important. All right. And I would want to start with your last assignment with the Government of India, which was with the National Security Council, where you worked with Shri Ajit Doval, who is like hotshot man now in the in this NDA government. I would want to start from there, and then we will go back to your probably NDA days in terms of making of a general, I would want to call it. So how is it in National Security Council? How what are the, you know, how is the scenario planning done there, and what's the environment like that the experts like you contribute and be part of? Over to you, General Menon.
Thank you, Rishi. Actually, I had 5 years in the National Security Council Secretariat, and I worked directly under 2 national security advisors, Shivshankar Menon for 3 years and 2 years with Ajit Doval. And in fact, when I went there, I was still in service. I just finished my tenure as the commandant of the National Defense College. And after I finished that tenure, I went on deputation to the National Security Council Secretariat as the first military advisor there. There was no military advisor at the National Security Council Secretariat before.
Okay, so you were the first one.
Yeah, I was the first one, and it was a secretary to the government, and I was although in service, I used to be functioning in a civilian uniform, and I had to set up what is called the military wing. So a lot of my course mates and friends used to ask me that, you know, that famous question, "Tu karta kya hai? What do you do?" Now, when you go to an organization like that, everything in that organization, because it is the highest level, a National Security Council is supposed to be, a secretariat is the think tank for national security. I mean, they're supposed to be the ones who look at the future, spot the threats well in advance so that you take action to meet those threats. That's what National Security Council Secretariat and Council is supposed to do. It came about after the Kargil review, in which it was sort of I realized that we were totally unprepared for what happened in Kargil. And therefore, the National Security Council Secretariat's job was actually this: to look into the future and do the long-term planning for national security plan. And for a long time, since it came about in the 2000, and I'm talking about now 2011, so for about 11 years, they had no military representative. They had one, but at a lower level. So I was the first one brought in at a level at which already there was a deputy NSA, and I was the military advisor. So my friends kept asking me, "What do you do?" And the thing is that when you're in an organization like that, everything there is top secret. So it was very difficult for me to really answer that question till I used to tell them actually that I'm still trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do because I'm a new man in the job. And I sort of kept that thing going in some form or the other. Then after 3 years under one government, I was then against another government. But that time I was known as the officer on special duty. I had the same secretary of government, but I was known as. So they used to ask me, "Now, what do you do now?" So, I mean, by which time I found an answer to this query. I used to tell them that the job is so secret that I'm not supposed to know it myself. And that's how I used to reply to them. So, in essence, India as a country, as a nuclear power, did not have anybody or any organization which really looked in the distance, try to spot what the problems are likely to be and take this thing what it is. And this is what every organization is supposed to do, although the distance might vary depending on the organization. I suppose in the corporate world, that distance may be a couple of years, maybe a 5-year or a 10-year horizon. A country actually has to have a much longer one. But depending upon the type of corporate world you are in, you would also look at what do you call a time horizon. These are all, you can say, things which you just imagine it. And I think what I must start by telling you a real life story to make you understand.
Mhm.
And this is a story which actually just transpired a couple of days ago. And what happened was about a year and a half ago, one of my colleagues, who's the number two in Takshashila, was number two. A colleague who was number two in the Raw, and was my colleague in Takshashila. He sent me a message. He says, uh, and since he's a Raw guy, he's in touch with with people in Pakistan. So he said he had just met up with this. He had gone, I think, to Bangkok. They were having these, what do you call, uh, the they have these meetings with them, which are non-official meeting and so on. So this guy asked him whether he can. There is a guy called Lieutenant. He was a lieutenant in 1971 war. His name is Lieutenant Mohinder Minhas, and it is settled in Jalandhar. He looked after. He was our guy who brought us from Bangladesh to the Indian POW camp. Can you locate? He told Anand Arni, can you locate this guy? So he gave me the task since he was an army officer. And he said it's a guides regiment, guides. We don't have any regiment called the guides. So I gave this job to one of my friends in the army headquarters, a serving lieutenant general. I said, can you locate this person? And well, I never heard back. And frankly, I also forgot and I did not follow. Day before yesterday, and this is coincident, I got a message saying that that guy has come back and he wants to find out, have you found that guy? So I just, off the cuff, I just rang up a friend of mine, my coursemate, who was a retired Major General in Jalandhar, and asked him, and spoke to him, and I told him the story. I said, can you find out about this guy? He was a lieutenant in 1971. This is his name. And this is what it is this chap in Pakistan is asking for. And sure enough, 2 hours later, he rang me back saying, I found the guy, this is the number. And I immediately rang up that person, and that guy told me his story. Now, this is the story. He is a second lieutenant in the 1971 war with one of the guards unit. I am from the guards, my own regiment. He is from 5 guards. I am from 7 and I commanded 13. He says that he was a second lieutenant and he was given the task of bringing these POWs by a special train from a station in Bangladesh to Fatehpur in UP. That's where we have an old cantonment. And he was given some, not from his own unit, he was given about 50 odd people to guard this thing. And the unit which was there is about 500 odd people were from one battalion called the 6th Battalion of the Punjab Regiment. Pakistanis also have the Punjab Regiment, so does India have, because actually they have a common. And during this journey, he met a guy who was part of the officers who said that he was a recruit in 2nd Punjab pre-partition. He's now an officer in that regiment. And he knew this guy's father because this guy's father was a Subedar Major of pre-partition 2nd Punjab. So when this connection was made, that connection has remained. And this person who said that he knows his father is the guy who went back to, after the war, joined the Punjab police, became an inspector general there. And then he got to meet Anand Arni, who, through whom now we got, or day before yesterday, we got that guy to get in contact with Mr. Javed from Pakistan.
Amazing.
What, I mean, just look, why am I telling you this? Because I think one of the most important lessons which we need to understand is that in this world, everything is connected. This connectivity is at the core of what we have to understand the world and actually to use this connectivity to the best. That, I think, is the main lesson here. And I think I can link it to what we are trying to actually look at right now in terms of your strategy and planning and so on. That everything is connected somehow to the other. It's like, to more and more the scientists are finding out that our cell and the physics and the chemistry of our cell biology is actually resembling in many ways what we look at in terms of the spatial objects, the physics of spatial objects. So the microcosm is actually mirroring the macrocosm. We can't understand the connection, but it is becoming more and more evident. And
this has been also the thought process of Indian spiritual, whatever you call Indian thought process.
Absolutely. And so actually we've been there, probably we haven't recorded it enough. So that's why we keep saying, the fact that the Prime Minister keeps repeating about the fact that Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam is this, that everything is connected. I mean, the whole world is a family, this is fundamental to the whole thing. So anyway, so I think interconnectivity and the connectedness is what we have to recognize. And that's
a good takeaway.
That's it's a very important one in terms of the fact that we can only imagine these connections in some case, but the most powerful tool that we have as human beings is our imagination. Now you're using the word strategy and planning. These are words which are actually artificial constructions. They do not exist in real life. They exist as interpretive tools of the human imagination to try and find out the meaning of things. And we believe during the course of using this that they are actually real. They are not. If you look at the words which we need to know in terms of the connection of policy, strategy, tactics, and planning, 4, let's say, levels, you will find that there are major connections between these two, although they exist at probably different levels in your imagination. There's so much of overlaps that when I went to the National Security Council Secretariat, one of the things I realized, and that's how I studied it, I realized that this is supposed to be policy making, but at the highest level between policy making and strategy, there is such a large overlap that it merges. That you can't differentiate between the two. It's difficult. Because why? Because these are artificial constructs. We think in the academic world, they have taught us that this is strategy, this is policy, this is strategy, this is tactics, and this is planning. We think that they're all different baskets and we should not. They are different, yes, but they're also hugely the same. And I think, we have to understand that this is what the artificial construction, it tends to confuse us and give us a sort of false positives which do not actually exist. So one of the things which we need to, I think I need to first get out of the way before we need to understand anything are these terms. The best way to understand these terms is about, you have to go to the heart of what we think strategy is, because that's a word which we use most, although it's connected to the rest. And policy is about what do we do? That's policy. Strategy is how do we do it? Tactics is related to strategy, but it's hugely different because we can have a strategy, but we do tactics. All actions are tactical. The actions which we do are tactical. So you can have a strategy, but you do tactics. The thing is, we often tend to conflate strategy and tactics by using one over the other. So, and the word planning, actually, it is relevant to all these 4 stages. And none of these things can be actually crystallized or developed. You can't develop a policy without actually talking to the people who have to develop the strategy. Because there has to be a lot of connection between the two because you can't think of what to do without knowing that how can you actually also do it. I mean, I mean, in our imagination, they're separate, but you got to be the same. It's like the political leaders telling the military, you go and capture POK, plan to capture POK. Those guys have no idea the thought of resources you require, not only to capture, but to hold it. Firstly, it's not a good idea to go and capture territory in a jihadized nation like Pakistan, because then you'll be fighting what do you call it, anti-terrorism or counter-insurgency operations for quite some time. So one of the things about this idea of we are going to take POK is actually just a political sloganeering more than anything else, and we have to understand it for what it is. So to come back to the issue of what I want to actually say in terms of these four, maybe what I will do is let me show you a slide. And I think I have just sort of, can I share the screen? Can you make
Sure.
me?
Sheetal, can you do that?
Yeah, I think I can.
Okay.
Am I sharing the slide?
Yes, you are.
Okay.
We can see your screen, not the slide as yet.
Okay, yeah. I just sort of, because I went off, so.
You have pretty huge backlog of emails, I can see. And I still get a very, very prompt response from you. That's amazing.
You don't know how an old man feels when somebody from his past catches up with him. Don't worry. When you reach my age, you will actually understand that.
I also remember this bridge.
You do.
Yes.
Because this bridge is what the course that I run is about. Okay.
Yeah.
This is the bridge which tells you the complete story of politics, strategy, tactics, and planning. And so I think I will explain it. And I've just tried and just made some modifications for putting it into a corporate structure.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is that everything is first under the cloud of what we call the environment. And that environment really has got two sides. One is the geopolitics, that is the politics between the actors at play, whether it is in the corporate world or whether it is between nations. There are always actors and their interests at stakes. And they actually determine the geopolitics. And in the corporate world, there is also the other side of the coin called geoeconomics. Does it make good sense in terms of politics, or does it make good sense in terms of economics? In the real world, politics normally trump economics. And that is why we say that political economy is what we have to live with. If human beings and institutions were rational, completely rational, then they would do everything which will be a win-win for everybody. That would be what they would pursue. But that's not how it works, because there are other factors at play. That is what is indicated by actors and what are their interests which are at stake. Because you are normally functioning from a quadrant which might have hope, aspiration, but also fear and a certain sense of self-centeredness. What will happen to me? How do I protect myself? And especially the corporate world, which is, in a sense, the protection of the private. Whereas the military world is actually not the protection of the private. It has much more a collective sense. And that is, I think, one of the differences between the ambience and the corporate. and the ambience in the military world. But that's, I think, it's not that it's completely different, because even in the collective world, there are a lot of people who will pursue their personal ambitions. Corporate world doesn't even try to conceal that, because otherwise they'll be difficult to exist. The individual there has to find a place, look for it himself, protect it, defend it, and promote it. So that's where there is a slight difference. And of course, all this is depending upon who's got power in the system. So whether it is in the geopolitics of the nation, or whether it's in the world of the market, between corporates, within corporates, who's the guy who wields the power? Because that's what finally governs all behavior. That you can get things, and power defined as getting ability or the influence to get things done the way that you want it done. That is power. And that is exercised by individuals and can be exercised also by institutions. And how all this is worked out will obviously have a cultural disposition. And I presume that when you say there is a business culture, what is common about the anarchic world is also, I suppose, the business culture is also sometimes a dog-eat-dog world, in the sense that everybody looks after themselves, and unless you do that, somebody else will come and eat you up. So the anarchic nature of both the international system and the business culture in spirit probably has a commonality. It may not nearly be the same. Also, the way you do business can also depend upon the culture, in the sense that if you are a Marwari, I presume that you have a particular culture that you will follow. So that is also influence. But you guys would be knowing more about culture. So these things is the environment in which you work. They don't go away, they simply change. They change because the changes which takes place to actors, to people, institutions, and to their interests as time goes on. The relationship between the actors, which is what is the degree of cooperation and conflict. If you really follow economic logic, you would really be at a heightened state of cooperation where everybody will benefit. But normally, I'm sure that is not the case in the corporate world also. There would be cooperation sometimes, and also conflict or adversity, or whichever way you want to define the relationship. But these are the two ends of a relationship. The best, and what we should strive for, is cooperation. For one thing, it is to realize in all strategy, in all policy, is cooperation is the best way to achieve the maximum. You know, there is this Israeli historian called Yuval Noah Harari. And I would suggest that those of you who are interested in really understanding, and especially his insight into the changes taking place in the modern world, just go on to YouTube. You can search for his name, UVAL.
His last book has become very famous. So
yeah, so I would suggest one of the things you can just start by this, looking at this one, 18 minutes. Why do humans control the world? So I think that itself will give you a good insight of the way it is. So cooperation is what you must strive for. Although in the practical world, it may not always be possible. So if you come into conflict, then you should also know how to deal with that conflict. So this is the ambience. This is what, it just changes its nature and its form, but essentially remains the same. And you have to be cognizant of this ambience. That is what keeps people, you can say, it keeps them tethered to the reality, because that is always changing. And what it does is, it shows you what your interests are, And whatever the interest is, whenever there is another entity involved, you cannot do away with the politics. I'm not talking about politics as the political realm. I'm talking about politics as a, a state of how human affairs are conducted. So even in the corporate world, there's politics, office politics within the organization. There will be politics between organizations. And of course, I forgot to actually tell you that on top of all this actors and interests, there is always the government which the corporate has to play within the regulatory framework of the government, the type of corruption and so on. All that is part of the geopolitics and geoeconomy. You can't do away with it. And that creates interests. And interests have to be arbitrated through politics, which means who you actually decide what to do. And that is how policy comes about. You have to decide what do you have to do, what it is to be done. As a planning process, it means about what is you going to look at a distance in this thing, what is the type of things you have to be involved in, and therefore that gives out what your objectives are. So this thing of policy, of looking at what to do, is about indication of what are the objectives you have to achieve for that what to do to be answered. So the first thing is about anchoring the ends, and what I put at the end, you can call it objectives also. Then achievement of those objectives has to be moved over the strategic bridge to the other side, and depends upon what means you have available to you. Although this slide is meant for a national security purpose and meant for statecraft, the principle is the same. As an organization, you have to know your objectives, but you can't have those objectives which you don't have resources for. So when you make those objectives, also you have to keep resources in mind. So you have to have a conversation over the strategy bridge on what could be your ends. Once you decide your ends, then you identify what are means available. And those means are listed on the left. You can have a parallel to all these means. Political, it means about how do the different entities within the organization interact with each other, what sort of power equation is formed between them, who is the financial guy more powerful, is somebody, production guy more powerful, or whatever you want to, whichever this thing you want to see. But there would be a power equation there. Who will be the ones who will make the final or influence the decision? You can't do away with that. And then in your case, where in statecraft would be an economic tool, you guys, one of the main things is financial. The end for you will always be profit. And that's what the corporate is meant for your actually increasing your stakeholders, what their remuneration they get, and so on. So the financial instrument becomes one of your main instruments, without which your ability to influence also decreases. So eventually it's about strengthening, because that's what the corporate is about, strengthening the financial instrument. And how do we do it? Of course, you don't have a military, not applicable to you, but you intelligence, you got to know about the others, you got to know about the environment, you got to know about what are the things which are going to happen, likely to happen. You'll have to look at whether there is, if your supply chain actually goes across the Middle East, whether there's going to be a war in the Middle East, or is it going to Africa, whether there's going to be a coup in that country, and so on. Unless you actually keep a lookout for all this, you will be surprised. So you should know as to where all is your points at which you need, what sort of information do you require. It's not about the information of what is happening now, what is likely to happen. That is what intelligence is about. And that is always the most difficult thing. You might have, the organization may not have the capability to know it themselves. They might have to get it from through somebody else and so on. But intelligence also applies to you as it does to national statecraft. Of course, technology is the game changer these days, so I don't have to say anything about that to guys like you. And that is now become more central than anything else. Diplomatic, I suppose, would be related to how would your people, who are those guys within the organization who does the interface with the government, the market, your consumers, and the rest of the environment, those would be the equivalents of diplomat. And then is this term which I have put down called strategic communications. So I suppose in the corporate world, it would actually be connected to two main. One is the image of your brand image, and the other one is the ability to influence your marketplace, because that is where you want your influence. How do you actually use information to influence the marketplace, the minds of people, their beliefs? If it's a product, then how do you actually sell them a product by which you use in power of information? Of course, all this is not, none of this exists by itself. You can't just have information power and not have a product. It'll all have to go together. Now, to understand strategy, let me say there are certain things which strategy is an approach, or it is what you need to understand in terms of the decisions that you take. And let me start by a very, very because it went to a, let's say, MIT in the US, or went to the IIT in India and so on. That would have a strategic effect. So finally, all action has to be judged by what is the effect it has strategically. That is what strategy is about. And I think this connection is something which one needs to differentiate. That you have a strategy, but you do tactics. And therefore, in your case, I have put, in terms of the geographic space in which normally military force is used and all others are used, technology and so on, it was through cyber, land, air, sea. These are the geographies. And in your case, whether you take it by a truck or take it by this thing will all depend upon the geography. But I think there's something which I've written down as market geography, which is what is the constituents of your market which you are trying to play in? How does the dynamics of that? What are the vectors in those markets? What are the constituents of that market? That would be the one in which your tactics comes into play. Who are those actors there? What do they consist of? I'm sure that each of these will depend upon which sort of market are you in. Are you in the real estate business, or are you into any other, let's say, the, what do you call it, infrastructure business and so on. So each one of them will actually have its own market geography. Understanding that market geography will require all sort of intelligence, all sort of technology, all sort of diplomacy and so on, for you to understand it and play within it. But what to do, that is strategy, is the most important thing to decide. Once you got that right, it doesn't mean that that is forever, because strategy is a process. It is endless, because all sort of things on this slide are changing, right? From the top to the cloud, things are changing. You can't have a strategy which endures forever. So that is why it is an endless process. And you have to keep modifying it to the conditions which are obtained. Especially for the military, your strategy is pitched against somebody who's also wanting to do harm to you, while you also want to do harm to them or threaten harm. So it is that much more difficult. Even in the corporate world, it's about the competition. There are people who you have to work against because the market share that you are trying to do has to be grabbed from somebody else. So there is an adversarial relationship also which can come about depending upon what sort of market we are talking about. So in essence, this process, this what we call strategy, is about ends, ways, and means. Ways are what comprises the strategy and tactics. Means are what you have. Ends are the objectives which you decide for yourself. But none of these are actually written in stone. It is the flexibility of this which makes it more important. In fact, I run a course which actually deals, of course, with the because on the left is the instruments of statecraft. So why is it that we all get surprised? Why is it that the world today is surprised? When we know that you have been constantly surprised all the time, only thing, the degree of that surprise varies. So one of the first lessons you need to know is that you will be surprised, not now, forever. Surprises will be flung on you throughout. The most important thing is when you are surprised is how do you react to that surprise? That is most important. How do you actually keep your wits about you? Try to discern what is the opportunity that the surprise has presented yourself and move in that direction. Otherwise, you can be frozen and try to examine how could it happen? Why did it happen? But that's mostly a waste of time because it has already happened. That you can discover over a period of time. The question is, what do you do now?
And in fact, gentlemen, if I can come in.
Yes.
And this is one of the very important things I wanted to discuss with you today, the topic that you've just touched upon on the surprise factor. And because I remember when we did the exercise Amrit, I don't know if it is still called exercise Amrit, but
of course. It's after all named after the whiskey of Bangalore. It won't go away.
Yes, Amrit Fusion is probably pretty awarded one. One of the things that was standing out in that exercise was the element of surprise that you introduced. And when you gave us scenarios, whether it was economics, whether it was political or military, the pace of change, we were scrapping our strategy almost every 5 minutes because you would change the scenario and you would introduce an element that you would have thought about. And that's what that was something that made most of us uncomfortable, probably except for the guys who were had some kind of a were from the armed forces. But this is not something we are used to. We like linearity. We like time frame. Whereas you were disturbing that, including waking us up at midnight, and honestly, we didn't like you much for that. So, but I observed that this is something we lack the agility of thinking in, right? And that is why we get, we don't like surprises, or we don't like the pace of it. We don't like the frequency of it coming in. So I wanted to understand, is there something different that, whether it's your training in NDA or yourself in NDC, is it that it is inculcated in the armed forces in a different way, or to be more prepared for it? Like you said, your enemy is also, trying to inflict the same kind of a damage on you. So I wanted to understand more about that because that has left an impression in my mind that it's something that our B schools in the corporate world do not prepare for. And I just also want to mention one of my friend who was in IIM. He had a conflict. He had an argument with his professor because the professor sent them an assignment at 1 o'clock in the night to be submitted at 6 in the morning. And he said, why couldn't you have planned it better? coming from the corporate. So he put the onus on the professor, saying that while professor must have done it on purpose, but he said, if you are a B school professor, you should have planned it much better and given us a much earlier in advance. So this is something we don't expect, and it makes us very uncomfortable. So that's where I wanted to ask you, how is it that your thinking is so natural and so easy? Because that day at 2 o'clock in the morning, you were the coolest person sitting in that room where all of us came rubbing our eyes, waking up, So, so that's something
maybe it is because I get up normally every day at 3 o'clock. That is why the reasons probably 2 o'clock
okay.
make a difference. But I think you raised a very important question. You see, what the military does is it believes in doing a lot of contingency planning. It's what it's called. Yes. That means it visualizes scenarios which are likely to happen, very well knowing that there are also a lot of scenarios which we can't visualize because of the complexity of the battle space itself. But at least if you are the maximum contingencies that you're mentally prepared for. I mean, now this, remember, has got two complements. One is the complement of the commander, who's the guy who's surprised because he's not prepared for it. The other one is the people down below who need to be told what to do in a particular set of circumstances. The more difficult thing is you will be able to visualize contingencies for what these guys are supposed to do down below. That is not very, because the type of content. More is about the chap who's on top and who's suddenly surprised because he's got something in his mind and he has to react to something which he has not planned for, which is not in his mind. And that is why one of the things which we say is to train people under pressure, because one of the things is you can't, how does militaries train? Because there's no bloody wars going on. But all conditions in which we are supposed to function is supposed to be when the shit is falling all over the place. So we make in peacetime, we put them into conditions where people are under tremendous pressure mentally. That, although this is not real life, this is already imagined situations, we just pose the situation. But the fact is, there is a tremendous amount of pressure. And one of the things which we know about pressure is when people do not have sleep. One of the things that militaries have to be prepared for is functioning without sleep. When things are really going bad, that's something we do not know the exact contingency, but we know this is the ambience in which decision making has to be done. So we prepare through our various exercises. And what I brought into Amrut is that if you don't have sleep and you are surprised, the two things in common. You're surprised and you don't have sleep. Make a diabolical combination, because the fact is that you really don't know what to do, because you're not mentally there, because you're tired, you haven't had proper sleep, and then you're confronted with a situation you don't know nothing about. That's why the first thing they say is, when you are confronted with a situation like that, first thing you do is go take a leak.
Sure, we did.
I think one of the lessons which for you guys from the pandemic is, don't think that this is the sort of surprise which will finish off after 1 year or 1.5. Surprise must be your constant. Because the type of changes which is taking place in the world today is at a pace which is not seen before. In 1964, there were probably a certain amount of companies in the what is it called, that first 500 companies, whatever that
Fortune 500, yeah.
Yeah. You look at them now and you'll find that so many of them already, they don't even exist. So the pace is going to be more, because creation and destruction are going to go at a faster pace, primarily because of technology. Fundamentally, there's going to be, this process is going to quicken. The more you can adjust to it, the more you can cope with it, because that's a given. This change is a given. You don't know in which form it's going to be. That's a problem. But the fact is, you have to be ready for it. So even at an individual level, you have to be ready for this change. The type of education which we are thinking of our children or your grandchildren are going to have may be completely different The type of skills which you have today may not be relevant from 10 years from now, or a couple of years from now. You need to probably reskill yourself many times over, because as I keep telling my children, you guys are going to live to 100, so you better work till 90, better be prepared for working till 90. So, uh, so that you can imagine the pace at which the change is taking place, and therefore, unless somebody is prepared to reskill, you can't survive. So the thing is, change is definite. The pace of change is also growing, so your challenge is that much more. There nothing you can do about these things. That is the relentless trajectory of technology and human progress itself. The people are just finding new ways, new geographies to work. I mean, look at the world of cyber as it is today. I mean, if you look at our communications which are available, I mean, the fact that we are now speaking in like this was unimaginable just not very long ago. So the thing is, even if you have a strategy, you have to completely be ready to change it as things are moving. You have to be aware of change itself. Not saying I've made my strategy now, people will just implement it. It doesn't work that way. Everything is connected. The way you do things are going to be completely changed. You yourself know that how the financial markets have changed, how everything is changed, how the construction industry has changed. Every damn thing has changed. So the question is, strategy as we know it, if you think it's a thing which you do and it'll long last and all, is a thing of the past. It has to be completely under scrutiny, completely adjusted to the changes. And those changes you can only spot if you're willing to take your time horizon as furthest as you can. Otherwise, it'll hit you first and then you will make the change.
Can you also give us some examples from your stint at Siachen where more than the enemy, there was a factor of weather changing as well? And especially because a lot of people here are from supply chain background, and I was keen to also ask you, the supply chain would be toughest in Siachen, right? How did you prepare for that, and how do people actually, those guys prepare for those scenarios?
One of the first things which we did when we came to know that our battalion is a battalion is about 1,000 people, are going to Siachen, was that we got this information from the people who were ahead of us. When we went to Siachen, the living space there was a tent. We used to live in tents called the Stromae tents. Now, of course, when we were there itself, the fiberglass shelters came. But when we were going there, this is the tent. So one of the most important gadgets to have in Siachen is actually the pumping stove.
Gadget.
Because that keeps the stove is what you use to keep you warm, to heat up anything. So it was essential that each and every individual had his personal stove. And of course,
really?
we had made, yeah, everybody has.
And so how many people are stationed there at any time?
So a battalion is, let's say, 1,000 people on top at any place. Depending on, we were a northern glacier battalion, which means the glacier itself is divided into northern, central, and southern glacier. Northern glacier is the toughest. It's got the major passes, the Bana feature, which is famous, Bana, the Paramveer Chakra. Then it's got another pass called Billafondla. I was the Billafondla, which is the main pass into the glacier. I was the company commander, the major commanding Alpha company of my battalion, 7 guards. Then there were 2 others. One is Siala, which is the northernmost of the lot. So the thing there is, you have very few people deployed right in front, but rest, let's say the ratio of people in front and the support structure, the logistics was much longer. So if there were 10 people in front, you required about 30 people to support them, because everything had to be, sometimes, of course, we had snow scooters later, but otherwise it had to be man-packed, carried distances. And there, walking at 20,000 or 18,000 feet, because of the lack of oxygen, it's a very tough thing even to just walk. Carrying weight is you can carry only very, very little weight. So the front post had less people, at least 3 times that number were required to support, because that's where every day you have to take up rations. You can't take everything up together. There is not enough space on top to keep it. There's another issue. So there, all these. So logistics is the greatest nightmare. And those days, of course, we used to have we used to exchange artillery fire with the Pakistanis. And when the Bofors were first inducted into Siachen, I was there at the base camp at that time. In fact, I got a photograph of the first Bofors firing from Siachen base camp. I was there at the base camp at that time. But the point was that it's difficult to hit anything with artillery there with accuracy because of the changing wind conditions and temperature conditions. So, you will be very unlucky for a round to kill somebody or hit something at all. So that's one of the good things. Not that it can't happen. It has happened. It happened even during my time. So the point is, there you have a situation where your logistic chain is much longer than your actual fighting force. There is always this thing about, and because you can't keep everybody there in the front line, you have to keep rotating within themselves. So if you want to look at logistic chains, what you call your supply chains today, what are you trying to do as a corporate? You're trying to make it faster and cheaper at the same time. That's primarily because that's finally how you make it happen. Keep it there. You don't know that somebody else is probably finding a better method to do it, and there probably are better methods which you don't know. So the thing is that all these things are changing at a fast pace that you can't say, that thing is organized, it's running very well. So I think, forget it. That attitude is the most dangerous. And actually, it can never keep up with it, because you guys are going to be in the next, your future is all going to be about the pace of change. The challenge is to keep up with that damn change before it hits you in the head. How do you adjust before you actually are overtaken by events? And you will still be overtaken by events in spite of all the things which you do, which is also you must be ready for. And when you're overtaken, don't think everything is gone. There's always a comeback. That is how the circle of life is. It goes round and round. When things seem to be all lost, there is always something which comes back. And that's finally what keeps human race at a pace at which we are still going. I'm proud. What we must say, whatever we might say, if you see the number of people you have taken out of poverty all over the world, if you look at it on a let's say aggregated basis, you're still making progress. Although that progress can never be satisfactory, but it will be progress. And therefore, change is what is your challenge. And strategy is not about something written in stone. It's about keeping up with changes. That is strategy.
Amazing. And thanks a lot, because I think a big takeaway in the last few minutes for me is, of course, then being prepared for the change, accept it, be flexible and agile. And also the what you said was very, has hit me really well, that while we will not be able to anticipate what change we may be faced with, but being ready with the environment in which we'll be taking those decisions is perhaps is a big big preparation, because at that point the people who take quicker decisions and would probably make themselves stand out, and that would come from the preparation of the environment. And as you mentioned, why you made us go through that drill, or it happens in the armed forces as well, that simulation of the environment, depriving sleep and surprise both. So
yeah, Rishi, I just got one more point which I think I must tell you, which is about how do you deal with the human capital which you have? Because I think the most important part of any organization is the human capital. How do you actually use that and I mean, not use it. How do you actually get them to attain their potential? Because this is very important for the well-being of the organization itself. And so let me just end this by a story, and this is a real life story. I started with the Indo-Pak story, and I must end with an Indo-Pak story. So this is the year 1973. I am a second lieutenant with my battalion, and my battalion is guarding a POW camp in Ramgarh in Bihar. Okay, so on 1st January 1973, there is this New Year's party going on at the club in the cantonment. I am being one of the junior most officer. I am a duty officer in the POW camp, which means I can't go anywhere. But since I am a guy who is a naughty chap, I decide that let me go and spend at least that 10 minutes before midnight New Year's in the club. So my plan was, I used to have a Java motorcycle. My plan was that I will leave at 11:45 from this thing. I dressed into civilian clothes, ready for a party. Quickly go into the party, say hi, Happy New Year to everybody, and then as my friends and all were there, and then rush back. Hopefully nobody would know that I would be the duty officer, and I would get away with it. I mean, one of those indisciplined things when you do when you're a young officer. So I was ready, and I was about to kick my bike, and I was about to take off when I heard a thud. What happened was, when I rushed there, one of our sentries, we used to have these guard posts in the camp, elevated. One of the sentries fell off from the guard post to the ground, and he was seriously injured. So we rushed him to the hospital. There was a hospital there, to the MH in Ramgarh. There was a duty officer, only one medical officer was there, a duty officer, and he saw him. He said that we need a surgeon. He said straight away. He said the surgeon is on leave. So I just at that time remembered that there is a surgeon, a Pakistani surgeon in the camp. So I drove back on my Java, woke up that Pakistani surgeon, told him that this is what has happened. Can you come and operate this guy? Believe me, he did not even hesitate for a moment. Not for a moment. He came with me. I took him to the hospital. He operated the Jawan and saved his life. Why I'm telling you this is, we are brought up on the diet that human beings are fundamentally bad guys, greedy, jealous. They want to actually do harm to everybody. But I think in many ways, that is a wrong way to deal with people unless he proves it otherwise. Because there is an angel and a beast in all of us. Try and see how much of the angel you can bring about. Because that angel is what is going to deliver. The beast will never deliver. Not to you, not to the organization. So you have to balance between these two. But to think that everybody is a rascal and therefore treat them like that when you are a leader and when you want to bring out their potential, I think is a wrong approach. And I think that's another lesson which you guys can take away. I think on that note.
Very, very, very thoughtful, and I think I agree, and a wonderful story. I was just remembering our yesterday's discussion with Rahul on his book about soft power as well. Well, you said that. General Menon, just one last question, and then I'll probably take some from the audience. Is you have been a lot outside India as well on the missions or the peacekeeping forces or whatever, to many countries. I got to know. Is there anything you found in other places which were culturally very different in terms of the topic that we are discussing, in terms of people's ability to take decisions or responding to them better, as you observe, versus us in this part of the world? Did you make any such observations that that you could remember or think of at the moment?
One thing which, when you travel, and I think I've traveled quite a lot, I've been very lucky. one thing is, the human nature is what is the predominant thing which you find. We might be different in colors, sizes, shapes, ethnicities, and rest of it. But there is this great connectivity which of human nature, which is the common thread. We only, politics makes us divided. That's a different issue altogether. You know, nations fundamentally are divisive elements of what do you call human being itself. But that's got a long history, so we won't go there. So I would think that if I were to compare, there is this good and bad and beast and angel in everybody. And normally, if you're nice to people, people are nice to you. And that's how it is. And even when you interact, I mean, I find with the Pakistanis, because there's so much of commonality between us, you meet a Pakistani outside India, and then, you know that we are the same. I mean, we are only politically divided. And if I, let's say, I go and meet a Danish general, I mean, his concerns and the way he looks at it are nearly the same. I can identify with him. I mean, although culturally they might have a different way of looking at it. One of the things I noticed about them is their sense of equality. You know, that everybody is, this thing is completely different from our hierarchical mindset of ours, where we actually very conscious of that senior, junior, and so on. They are probably conscious, but the way they treat their juniors and way they do it outside uniform and inside uniform, I found it complete. So there is always a cultural difference with differentiate. That difference doesn't go away. We are all, after all, cultural creatures. We have belief systems is based on that. But I think more importantly is that we are all the same.
Okay, sure. And thanks so much for these insights. There are some very, very good takeaways that I've made a scribble of, and I'm going to put it together. Thanks a lot, General Menon. I have a question from Sunil in the audience, and he's asking about your views on the risk management in the armed forces and any learning for the corporate sector. And while I was reading that question, I actually remembered one of the instances you told us about your stint in J&K, where there was an incident where one of your men shot the civilians by mistake.
Yeah.
You know, and because it was night time and the you know, they could only see the shadows, and there was you know, and you had to find out and you had to manage the situation because it was a civilian side. Somehow I remember that instance while reading Sunil's question. So you, of course, you can answer that and probably give us some tidbits. Those instances are very interesting to hear.
Yeah,
for
I think maybe I'll use the same story to illustrate the point. Yeah. You know, so I'm actually I'm a major general commanding the counterinsurgency force in South Kashmir. So I have my headquarters is in an elevated place called Avantipur, where we have an airfield, and mine is on the hillside, and I can see the Overwood Valley. I have a lovely, beautiful place where I stay, and I take a walk every morning. So I'm taking a walk in the morning when I get a call from one of the brigade commanders who informs me that in so-and-so place, three civilians have been killed by terrorists, and he's telling me that he's going there. So my first instinctive reaction to this thing I asked him was, did we have anybody near the incident site? He said, no, not nearby. About a kilometer and a half, they were on the ridge top, because at night we used to send out these patrols, and they used to be in ambush positions and so on, because at night it was a curfew. Civilians are not supposed to move. So the terrorists used to move, so we used to put these ambushes. So when I heard this, instinctively, I realized there's something wrong. So when I told him, okay, you go find out, go to the incident site, let them explain it to you. So he went there, and then he rang me up from there, and he said, I've spoken to the patrol commander. Patrol commander says that he was in so-and-so place, and he heard the shots, came down. It took about 25 minutes, and came down to the spot and found out that these three civilians, they apparently they had gone to the field because they were carrying these agricultural implements, and they have been killed by these terrorists. So when he told me this story, I said, I don't believe it. He was there on the spot and he had spoken to the people who had participated. But I said, I don't believe this. So while he was trying to say no, he's quite sure, I said, I don't believe it. So I immediately took an instinctive decision that we are going to say that this was an accidental firing by our men, and we are conducting an investigation, and we will take action against if it is required. So he was very upset, the brigadier, but I told him, no. I said, you take these guys back to the unit, find out the truth from them. I don't believe this. So he took them back and then put the officiating CO on the job to find out. The CO was on leave. The CO was a very good officer. So 24 hours passed and they came back to me and said, no, this is correct story and all that. There's no thing. Meanwhile, I'd done one good thing is I told my corps commander, my boss, the Lieutenant General in Srinagar, that this is what I've done. I don't think these guys are telling the truth, but I think I'll find out in the course of time. So 48 hours later, my own staff was telling me, sir, I don't think you're correct. You better, I think we should not put the blame on these guys because they're not. So then I rang up this commanding officer who's in Lucknow on leave. And his name was Joshi. I used to call him Joe. I said, Joe, you will not come back from leave, but you will, from there, you will find out user resources of what actually happened. And I said, I'll give you 24 hours. So in 24 hours, Joe came back to me and told me what happened. And what did he do? He used the religious teacher. Each unit has got a religious teacher, who does the mandir. And this was a Garhwal rifle unit. And that guy actually cracked one Johnny who told him what the truth was. And the truth was these men, the patrol leader did not go to that ridge top to take ambush position. He took a shortcut, did not climb up, put his ambush outside the village next to a nala. And an ambush at night means that two people are on duty, the rest sleep, and they keep changing their duties. So these two people who were on duty suddenly realized that there were some people coming towards them, and they looked through their night vision devices and they thought that those people were carrying weapons on their shoulders. Actually, it was agricultural implements. But in a night vision devices, may not be very clear. So when that happened, and they shouted out, and these people took out the agricultural instruments probably down, they thought they're about to fire, so these guys opened fire and killed them. This was the story. Now, to cover up the mistake was what the story was said that they were actually there, and they came down and, they were blaming it on the terrorists. So I was asked, I said, how can you actually, I said, when I was a Major General, this was my third tenure in command of troops. I was a battalion commander there, I was a brigade commander there, battalion commander in Central Kashmir, brigade commander in North Kashmir, now as a general in South Kashmir. So I had enough experience to tell me that terrorists don't do such things. They don't kill innocent villagers at night. These villagers are not supposed to go out because there's a curfew, but they must have gone out because they're tentative field. They must be doing this because nobody checks them. So I knew this is something wrong. But the point was that even my faith, it was nearly shaken till I made that call to the CO, because I thought the only guy who can find out the truth is the CO. So I think sometimes decision on instinct is not based on instinct, but it is probably an accumulated experience which makes it instinctual. That is what it is. Although I had nothing to tell me except the story. I couldn't have gone with anything else. So in your case also, sometimes that experience will tell you instinctively there is something wrong here. It'll tell you, no.
And this is what that officer who actually took the shot lacked, because at his level he did not have the experience to think that probably these cannot be terrorists at that point, whatever, because the experience is not.
He's a Jawan. He's looking through his binoculars. These night vision devices don't give you that this thing of the real. The image which you get, for him it is life and death. Okay. So he's got to kill that guy before that guy does something to it. The moment he thinks that guy they must have moved the weapon, they must have thought that they are going to fire. That's all. So they were not to blame. It was the leadership, the patrol leader who was to blame, and the officiating commander who should have actually found out the story. So you can't. I couldn't have possibly blamed those guys, and I found it very difficult later as to how to manage it. But that's another story by itself. So instinctive is based on experience. It doesn't come from nowhere. It is based on something buried in your subconscious.
Amazing. I was just thinking, in our world, this is called a forecast error, in when you do something like this. But then making a forecast itself, like you said, is lot dependent on the instincts. And the instinct is basically accumulation of all your experience, and you very, very beautifully put it, and how at your level also you you utilize that. This is a wonderful story, actually. It has many aspects to it. So thanks for sharing it. I would just open up. If anybody else has any questions?
Hey, listen, I have another webinar at 5, so I need a break.
Okay. All right.
Unless, of course, somebody's got one question, I'll take one more question.
Okay, we'll probably take one in case anybody has. People must be too much still off digesting what you're saying, so they probably may not have. But I would rather take this time to thank you once again. And I really hope that we get opportunity to hear from you or learn from you sometime soon again. I'll probably talk to Soumya and see if we can have some cohort with you. That would be very nice. By the way, are the GC what's called Defense and Foreign Affairs?
Defense and Foreign Affairs. We are going full stream. I've got about 100+ people doing the course now, and really? Everything is online, including the workshop.
100. Wow.
We have already conducted 2 online workshops, so we are okay.
And at this point, they're on any
very much on. Today was that it's a Saturday, 3 webinar day, so this is my 4th one. And I've got one at 5 o'clock. So I'm going full steam today.
Wow. Thanks so much, sir, for accepting this and spending time with us. It was really
always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir.
I learned from you as much as you learned from me. Just remember that.
Thanks so much. Thank you. And I'll hope to see you soon again. Take care of yourself. Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.